have a sick, twisted mind when it comes to college football chaos. Call me the Joker from the Dark Knight. I'm an agent of chaos. I embrace the craziness that is going to occur in our sport this year. And when it's the only thing on my brain, it literally fills my mind. And so now I get to share it with you. Recently, I was talking to a buddy about conference realignment with Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC and the expanded college football playoff. And he asked me, hey, Cole, what is the most nightmare scenario you could come up with for the college football playoff committee? And I said, well, the Big Ten and the SEC want the most representation because of the media rights. So probably a lot of teams going 10-2 or higher. And he asked me, well, how many do you think could actually do that? I said 5 or 6. And then I saw CBS Sports come out with a list saying that 7 teams from the SEC will finish with a 10-2 record or higher. And I started doing some digging, and they're not wrong. But what's even crazier is 8 teams could finish with a 10-2 record in the SEC this year. Yeah, 8 teams. And now we got to talk about it. So what's going on, SEC Unfiltered? It's Cole Thompson here. Make sure that you like the video, hit the ring notification. That way you don't miss a single episode. And hit subscribe because we're talking college football and chaos theories every single day leading up to week 1. Download the podcast version of the show wherever you get your podcast listening systems. Make sure that also you're following us on all the social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. If you want to scream at me for coming up with this theory that now is going to linger in your brain, follow me on Twitter at Mr. Cole Thompson. And to keep up with the #1 content surrounding your favorite sport, make sure that you visit SECUnfiltered.com. This episode's brought to you by RHOBACK. Use promo code SECU for 20% off all joggers, polos, hoodies, shorts, much more. Promo code SECU when you visit RHOBACK.com. Yes, there is a scenario where 8 teams finish with a 10-2 record. That would basically mean that the theory of a 10-2 record guarantees you a spot in the college football playoff is thrown at the wayside. Here's the even crazier part. They all cannibalize each other. One team comes out with 1 loss. Everyone else absolutely flounders. I'm going to tell you the 8 teams real fast. Number 1 is Georgia. Number 2 is Texas. Number 3 is Alabama. Number 4 is Ole Miss. I don't think anybody has a thought that those weren't going to be in the conversation. Number 5 is Missouri. You look at their schedule, very manageable. Number 6 is LSU. Yes, LSU, even though they have question marks and a Swiss cheese secondary, they're still in the hunt. Tennessee, up Neyland, comes in this conversation. And Oklahoma pulls up the rear. Let's go through the entire scenario. That way you know what I'm talking about because I don't want to feel crazy. So, Georgia, the favorites to win the SEC in 2024. Everyone knows what they're returning on offense. Everyone knows what type of defense they're going to have. Everyone believes that Carson Beck is going to be the first quarterback taken and certainly a front runner for the Heisman Trophy. So he goes and he plays against Texas on the road on October 19th. That game ends up becoming the first L on the schedule. Heartbreaker. Absolute madness. But they do beat Alabama on the road. They do beat Auburn at home. They do beat Mississippi State. And then 3 weeks later, on November 9th, they also travel to Vaught Hemingway Stadium. And Lane Kiffin gets the last laugh. And they end up losing that game, thus 10-2. But they still close out the year on a promising note with wins over Tennessee, wins over UMass, wins over Georgia Tech. So let's talk about Texas. They have the second best odds. Newcomers to the party, but everyone knows that Texas is built to win now. They scour the transfer portal for talent at wide receiver. They added in more players on the defensive front. They brought in Johnny Nason over from Arizona. Really solid defensive coordinator. They end up losing 2 games as well. So they do beat Georgia at home. Massive win. Everyone is celebrating on the 40 acres. We belong in the, we're not going to say it because Quan Crosby even came out and said, we don't claim to be a part of that conference like the other school. But they lose 2 early games. So they win against Vanderbilt, they win against Florida, they win against Texas A&M in the rematch of the Lone Star Showdown. They beat Kentucky, they beat Arkansas, but they lose to Michigan in week 2. It's a game where you think that the big house is big, bright lights. Unfortunately, this is a matchup where Texas doesn't see its wide receivers take that next step. The defense is fundamentally sound underneath a brand new coordinator in Wink Martindale. And Ann Arbor is rocking and rolling, and now comes the comments. Oh, the Big Ten's better than the SEC. Big Ten's better than the SEC. And then, as history has shown us, and unfortunately, Texas fans, you may not like to hear this, but You have been Ole Miss's bitch for a while when it comes to the SC, when it comes to Red River. They have won 7 of the last 10 matchups. On top of that, Oklahoma, my apologies, Red River Showdown. Oklahoma has also been able to put together a roster that holds its own every single season. So Oklahoma, you lose Red River. That brings a heartbreaker down. But it's one conference loss, so actually Texas going to Atlanta not only punches their ticket, but they still are in the driver's seat to command a spot in the college football playoff. You can almost guarantee at this point Texas does clinch a playoff spot. Alabama, brand new era underneath Kalen DeBoer. Brand new era underneath Jalen Milroe in this up-tempo offense. New wide receivers, new defensive front, all of that aside. You lose to Georgia. Unfortunately, Georgia's just more equipped. It's a night game. It's in Bryant-Denny Stadium. I like the feel, but it's not enough to get you over the hump. Kirby Smart gets Kalen DeBoer's number, and he calls it a day. But you still beat up on Western Kentucky. You still win the Iron Bowl. You still beat up on Oklahoma. You still beat up on Wisconsin. You still beat up on South Florida. But you do lose one rivalry game. You go back to Neyland Stadium. You go back in front of the fans that are clad in the orange and white. And Josh Heupel gets to say, look, I knew that last season we had Joe Milton as our quarterback. It's not the end of the world. They end up winning the third Saturday in October. So the 2 losses for Alabama are Georgia and Tennessee. Let's talk about Tennessee real fast. Nico Iamaleava comes on in. Everyone is excited to see what he's going to bring to the table. Everyone believes that this offense is going to be a brand new high-tempo formation. They know how talented this roster can be. They unfortunately don't get a win in their first SEC game of the season against Oklahoma. It's a reunion for Josh Heupel. He comes back to Norman. Gaylord is high tempo, rocking and rolling. Everyone knows that this team is ready to go. And that vertical passing attack eats up on the secondary. They eventually just cannibalize, and Jackson Arnold gets a little bit of respect. Nico Iamaleava may have lost the battle, but he may not lose the war. He does get a win over Alabama, but then unfortunately, they run to the buzzsaw that is the Georgia Bulldogs. That defense will shred left and right. They have a secondary that knows no limits, and they too end up now being 10-2. So you see where this pathway is going. So far, 4 teams with 10-2 records. It's all making sense. Speaking of which, let's talk about Oklahoma that way. Oklahoma, there's a lot of question marks when it comes to the offensive line. There's some question marks when it comes to the defensive line. There's not a lot of question marks when it comes to the wide receiver room. Vertical passing attack, vertical passing attack, vertical passing attack. And they have the quarterback to do so. People don't want to give Jackson Arnold his respect, but they should, because here's the deal, ladies and gentlemen. Dillon Gabriel left because Jackson Arnold arrived. They end up getting a monumental win over Tennessee in the first SEC matchup. They end up beating Texas in the Red River Showdown. Everyone is excited to see Oklahoma go on this pathway. They beat South Carolina. They beat another team that we haven't even brought up yet. They beat Maine, and they beat Missouri. The rivalry of the Big 12 is back, and Oklahoma actually going into the final few weeks of the season is 10-0. But unfortunately, there is a price for being 10-0. The target gets bigger, and the competition gets tougher. They want to be the one to knock you down a pedestal. And they lose their last 2 games at home to Alabama and on the road Thanksgiving weekend against LSU. Better luck next year, but you are still showing you belong. So let's talk about Ole Miss for a second, because Ole Miss is a team that people definitely want to know. They feel like their schedule is manageable beyond belief. They get wins over Furman, Mississippi, Middle Tennessee State, Georgia Southern, Wake Forest, Kentucky, South Carolina. They're in a good spot. Then they go to Baton Rouge. I can tell you this much. October 12th, you can almost guarantee that that night is going to be a night game in Tiger Stadium. Death Valley is going to be a cemetery for the Ole Miss Rebels. It is. It's going to be one of those games where, unfortunately, Jackson Dart just doesn't pick up a little bit of momentum, and he drops it. But they get the rematch. They get the rematch win over Georgia. They show that they made moves in the transfer portal. They showed that they were able to build this roster up. And then, unfortunately, another game, another heartbreaker. Oklahoma finds a way to capitalize. Jackson Arnold becomes a stud. Let's talk about Missouri. Missouri drops a game also to Oklahoma. That's one where a lot of people are saying, well, that's not possible. Caden Green comes on in. Caden Green, we own this rivalry. Sure, but unfortunately, that's just one where you aren't able to come out on top. So you drop that game on November 9th, and then the week before, you're coming off of a beaten bludgeoning, even though you had a bye week, against Alabama on the road in Bryant-Denny Stadium. I just think right now, when you look at these two teams, it's hard to beat Alabama, the standard of what is the Crimson Tide in their own backyard. So that's a loss. But you do beat Auburn, you do beat Texas A&M, you do beat Vanderbilt, Boston College, Buffalo, Murray State, UMass, Mississippi State, and Auburn. South Carolina as well. So now you're 10-2. And lastly, let's talk about LSU. So LSU comes in, and they get a win to start off the year against USC. Welcome to the Big Ten. We're better than you. Suck it. Then you play Nichols. Then you play South Carolina, UCLA, South Alabama, Ole Miss. Right now, you are sitting at 6-0. This is exactly what you want. But then comes October 26th, and unfortunately for you, that's where it all comes crashing down. Texas A&M, that's a game where unfortunately you just aren't able to hold your own. You just aren't able to get that momentum. And there you are, dropping your first game. And then a week later, or week and a half later, whatever it is, then you play against Alabama. You know what? This has always been a great rivalry. It has. In the last decade plus, it has grown to new heights. It's grown to levels that we cannot even comprehend. But the game may be in Death Valley. Remember what happened last time? Had to go down to the wire. Just feels like this time, Garrett Nussmeier, you don't have Jay and Daniels that's going to be there on 4th and short to pick up a first down, to score in the end zone. You drop that game too. But you do close out the year with wins against Florida and Vanderbilt and Oklahoma. And there you are. You're 10-2. So let's go through that one more time. Georgia loses to Texas and Ole Miss. Texas loses to Michigan and Oklahoma. Oklahoma loses to LSU and Alabama. LSU loses to Texas A&M and Alabama. Ole Miss loses to LSU and Oklahoma. Mizzou loses to Alabama and Oklahoma. Tennessee loses to Oklahoma and Georgia. And Alabama loses to Georgia and Tennessee. That is nightmare scenario fuel, because one team is guaranteed in the playoff at this point. It's Texas, because they have one conference loss and one non-conference loss. Everybody else, you're trying to scramble who has the best record. And that's the beauty of college football. You want to talk about nightmarish scenarios. You want to talk about fuel that invigorates your brain. You want to talk about things that don't need to exist, but potentially could exist. This is the death sentence of all death sentences. You want to talk about the SEC being able to stick out its chest and go, you don't think that we are the best conference? We cannibalize each other at the top. And we got 7 teams behind Texas, which may be number 1 in the country, or at least number 2 at worst. We got them sitting anywhere between 4 and 12. You really want to tell us that we're not the best conference? Oklahoma comes on in. They show their stuff. Nico Iamaleava is as advertised. He beat freaking Alabama. Missouri lives up to the hype. Ole Miss doesn't drop a beat. They're all right in the running. Yeah, but we're not the best conference in college football. That, my friends, is a nightmare scenario for the College Football Playoff Committee. It's a great day for SEC faithful everywhere, because it just shows you that you are a little bit more provocative and a little bit more boastful when it comes to what you bring to the table. But at the same time, unfortunately, this will be one of those moments where we either see the committee get it right, or we actually have to go back to the drawing board and wonder what is the best pathway to a team making it to the championship. But let me know in the comment section down below. Do you have a nightmare scenario worse than the one I just presented? 8 teams going 10-2 in 2024? Give me a break. You don't. But also make sure that you're following us on the socials, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, at SEC Unfiltered. Download the podcast version of the show. If you like this type of content, leave a 5-star review. If you hate this type of content, leave a 1-star review. And to keep up with the #1 content surrounding your favorite team, make sure that you visit SECUnfiltered.com. I'm Cole Thompson. Until next time, folks, later.